Hi, my name is David Bose. I am the Communications and Marketing Director for Washington Policy Center, and this is Washington Policy on the Go. Every week during the legislative session, we come to you usually around noon, but today we had some technical difficulties that I'm still working on. I appear to be a little bit blurry, but anyway, you know how it is, Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will, and it will at the least opportune time. And that's pretty much what happened today. However, I do have great news for Washington Policy Center. Particularly if you're an Eastern Washington person, but I think across the state, we made the announcement today that Michael and Eleanor Baumgartner are our new senior advisors for Eastern Washington. You'll remember Senator Mike Baumgartner, well, he was a senator, now Spokane treasurer, but this is in a different capacity, of course. He and his wife Eleanor are now our senior advisors for Eastern Washington. They're going to provide leadership in Eastern Washington, hosting WPC events and spreading WPC's message throughout the east side of the Cascades. And that's just terrific news. I used to work with Mike Baumgartner at one point, and he's one of the more capable, intelligent, and extremely effective communicators. So we're really excited about this news. You can read more about it at washingtonpolicy.org. And you can read more about he and his wife's history. She was an investigative journalist, so there's a lot of talent being brought to bear there in Eastern Washington, and we just couldn't be happier to have them on board with us. And it's just great timing for this state and for you. So you can go to washingtonpolicy.org. You can see that story, and soon you'll be able to say in Eastern Washington at a WPC event, "Hey, welcome." And it's not like it's not like they're new to Washington Policy Center. Baumgartner was named the champion of freedom once, I think it was 2018, 2017, somewhere in there. And then he might have forgotten, but he was among the legislators listed, I think, in 2014. So in a way, it could be he could lay claim to a double award there. So really great news for Western Washington, for all of Washington and Eastern Washington, to have our new senior advisors for Eastern Washington. This duo that has so much talent and so much to offer our state. So we're really excited about that. Also want to remind you that during the legislative session, we have updates on a regular basis, constantly at our blog at washingtonpolicy.org. So every day you can check out what's happening in Olympia, what's happening with our center directors. They try to provide you with the latest of news. Mark Harmsworth, who had some dental work today, otherwise he would have been joining us, has a great blog up about some unintended possible consequences of a new Senate bill, 6064, which would cap the amount that one could impose for damage deposits for pets at $150. And he points out that $150 is about the cost to clean a carpet in a smaller apartment. So he points out that what this could end up doing is making it so that landlords or property owners would have to decide, hey, am I going to allow pets and suck up the rest of this damage, or am I just going to say no pets? And, obviously that companionship is extremely important to many people around the state. So, while people are making proposals saying, hey, we want to help people, we want to reduce the cost of rent, and we think, these expenses for pet owners are unfair, there's unintended consequences of government stepping in and trying to mandate, what the price should be, because the information that's being imparted by the price, the information is, hey, there's extra damage when pets are involved, or extra damage very possible when pets are involved. So there's this requirement for the extra damage. Property owners have that information immediately. They know they live it, they know the risks. Then you have bureaucrats stepping in and saying, no, we want to set this price. We want to create this price cap because we think we know better. And then these unintended consequences follow. And that's one of the things that Washington Policy Center points out for people. Like I said, we would have had our small business center director, Mark Harmsworth, on today, but he just had some dental work, so you wouldn't be able to understand what he says anyway. And that's not because of his accent, but because of the dental work. We are expected to be joined by Todd Myers coming up. He had a couple of different testimonies to offer in the legislature today, so we'll be joined by him we hope, a bit later in the program. First, we're going to be joined by Pam Lewison, our Center for Agriculture Director, who has an update on the H-2A program and some legislation there. She is at an event right now. That's why you have the kind of cool background and the blazing white light shining in the back. It's not a UFO, just a light in the background. Pam, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. I'm trying to blur my background a little bit. There we go.
There we go, yeah. Looks good. So tell us about what the problem is with the latest proposals dealing with H-2A workers and how that would impact farms and Washington State specifically.
So this new piece of legislation is really around tightening how we track H-2A workers. The trouble is a lot of what they're asking for is duplicated work. We already do track how much H-2A workers make, how they are paid, where they live. Those are all things that are under the auspices of the federal H-2A program. What's interesting about this particular piece of legislation is that we have some lawmakers who feel it feels a little bit like a gotcha. They're trying to figure out how to catch people with their hand in the cookie jar, even though by and large, the H-2A program is conducted in a legal and careful manner because it has to be. And their biggest argument with the way the program functions is that they're trying to find whether or not there is a wage depression by the number of H-2A workers we have. So for people who don't know, we have an average of 35,000 H-2A workers who come specifically to Washington to work every year on farms and ranches. Those folks have a legal visa to be here, so they can work here for up to 10 months. They can ask for either a renewal, which is effectively a continuance of their visa, or they can go home. So part of that is that an employer has to prove that we don't have enough workers to satisfy their work needs, and to make sure that there's no wage depression. We have an artificial minimum wage for visa workers called the adverse effect wage rate. It's about $3 an hour higher than our current state minimum wage, and it is the basement level. It's the minimum amount that you can pay an H-2A worker and any local worker who is working alongside those folks. And this year it's $19.25 an hour.
So would you say that that kind of reflects a lack of understanding of the initial program? I mean, because you and we have an animated video out about that. Where you've described in that video, and elsewhere, and we've done it here before, we've done it in op-eds and other things. You've described how under the H-2A program, there's no, the other workers would have to get paid at least as much. There's just there cannot be a depression of that wage based on that. You might be able to make an argument on supply and demand. The problem is, you're not filling the jobs. I forget what the percentage was, but it's ridiculously low, the number of jobs that are being filled in the agricultural sector for these kinds of harvesting jobs outside of the H-2A program.
Yeah, so the way that H-2A hiring works, you have to advertise as a local employer. You have to advertise for a minimum of 60 days before you can hire anyone on an H-2A visa. And then you have to hire longer. So even if you employ H-2A workers, which is a monumental task in itself, aside from the wages, you also have to provide housing and transportation, medical care. All of those things are on the employer's shoulders. But you also have to give preference to any local worker who shows up for at least 50% of the contract length. So you may hire 700 H-2A workers, and if you have 350 people show up after you have all of your workers employed, you have to sit 350 of your H-2A workers and say, I can't have you work today because I had 350 local people show up.
And that's really incredible to me because, I mean, I had even forgotten about the advertising ahead of time, and the longer term of employment for non-H2A. Do you find that when you're speaking or testifying or meeting with legislators that there's, obviously people who deal with it every day, likely Eastern Washington legislators are going to understand that. Do you find that when you're dealing with Western Washington legislators who are making policy about these kinds of things, do they understand these kinds of nuances to the law? I mean, I hate to even use nuance because it seems like just a technicality, but the details, the important details of this program.
So I think it's important to note that H2A in particular is complicated, right? It's not an easy program to work your way through. So it really helps to be someone who has either, in my case, 5 years of talking about H2A, researching about it, reading about it, learning about it, or you have, a specialist who can help you go through every little minute detail that goes into that H2A program, because it is complicated and it does require a lot of attention to detail and a lot of nuance and a lot of timing. And I think that's something that we continue to argue about because people don't really understand all of the complexities of the program. And I would argue, I've done this for 5 years. And there are still things that I learn about the H2A program every day.
And that should give people an idea. Here's Pam, a researcher and expert, and she is still learning things about this specific program. And, you can imagine a farmer who, I don't know if you know this, Pam, because you are there for farm yourself, joking, but farmers tend to be pretty busy people. I mean, every farmer I've ever met, they're on the move all the time. They're waking up early, they're staying up late, they've got a lot of things to do, and they're always working. When they have fun, they're out, they're having a good time, and they're right back at it because, there is no, there are times when you can't wait a week because the crops or the livestock or whatever it is that you're doing will not wait. There is no, that they decide the clock, that nature decides when you've got to work. So the idea that an expert like yourself has to spend all this time just to get the details should give people, should open their eyes to the complexity and some of the challenges of this program. So
yeah, I think it's a program where you have to really be a student of it to really wrap your arms around it. And I think that for the average person, average farmer going through their day, unless you have done this, this whole process over and over and over again, where it's almost muscle memory and automatic, you're not going to get it without help. It's because it is complicated and it requires several steps and a lot of planning ahead. And trying to anticipate your needs well in advance of when those needs are actually going to occur.
Yeah, I mean, it's been eye-opening for me, to learn about the program. I think it's really fascinating, and it's also frustrating because you're watching people who, I grew up in a rural North Snohomish County, wasn't on a farm, and we had animals. We had, pigs and a cow for a while and a pony and things like that. So some people might think of it that way, but it wasn't a farm. I was around a lot of farm kids and my, had family in farming. And so I understood it. But it is shocking to me how many people, especially as we become more urbanized, are just totally divorced from the challenges and the lifestyle that comes with farming. I mean, I think they get most of it from, if they understand it at all, they're thinking about it from a TV point of view or from, some kind of activist who's angry about food or whatever, assuming that animals are just living in these horrible spaces, and that if a farmer could, they'd have this the cow or the chicken or whatever miserable and stressed out the whole time, which of course, as you pointed out, that's going to be detrimental to the farm if that takes place. So yeah,
we do have a question that I wanted to just touch on briefly. what's interesting about the hourly versus bin or piece rate.
Oh, let me read the question first. I was going to get to that. The question's from Heidi. It's how are the hourly wages now comparing to the by the bin type work in the past? By the bin meaning, when you were picking fruit or something, you'd have a big bin and you'd fill up the bin and you'd get paid based on the bin instead of based on the hourly wage now. So go ahead, Pam.
Okay, so I'll try and shout it out for you here. So the way that hourly rate versus piece rate works is in this particular instance somewhat unique. We've had a lot of court cases and other regulations come in to make piece rate less attractive. So or a bin rate, whatever you want to call it. When you think about things like the Sakuma Brothers case that made it so that growers had to pay an hourly rate for rest and lunch breaks, and then they could switch back to a bin or piece rate. It starts to get really complicated on that HR and payroll accounting side of things. And so more often than not, what we're seeing is this move to just doing a straight hourly rate, because you also have to factor into that Washington State requires overtime pay for all of our agricultural employees. So if you are paying a bin or piece rate, you still have to figure out how to distill that rate into an hourly rate. You can't have it be one or the other. It's got to be something where you can account in your payroll system for potential overtime pay. And that makes it really complicated to try to do several different forms of pay at once. If you were an experienced picker once upon a time, it was not uncommon to get paid $30 a bin. And you'd be able to do that in an hour. So you were making $30 an hour. But if you're not an experienced picker, you don't know how to pick for color, you're new to it, and you're suddenly having to figure that out, you're not picking 8 bins in a day. Maybe you're only picking 4. And so then you're actually earning significantly less than you would if you were working on an hourly rate. You go from $30 an hour for 8 bins in an 8-hour period to what distills down to $15 an hour because you were only able to pick 4 bins. So it's something where for the ease of accounting, it makes more sense to have everyone be at an hourly wage.
Yeah, that's and then the complication. I mean, with what you're talking about, the complications of just trying to figure out, the mix between the piece and the hourly wage and all that. I mean, it sounds like a nightmare to me. I'm just not, that my brain does not work that way. And I instantly feel sorry for bookkeepers and anyone else trying to keep track of such things, because it's just, you just think about it and it just feels more complicated than it has to be. And that alone is frustrating. You just think, let me pay people based on what they're willing to do the work for so I can move on, and do this. It may be the last thing artificial intelligence is not capable of replacing us with at this point. So that's one of the frustrations. I want to remind people, if you ever have a question during a Washington Policy on the Go segment, just type it into the Q&A box there. It's easily done, and we'll add that question into the conversation whenever possible. We'd bring you forward on video, but it gets a little more complicated and messy. So we just find this to be the easiest way. But we come to you every week with an update on the legislative session and what's happening here. Follow-up question from Heidi. Sounds like the regulations have driven it into hourly wages, but it's probably more expensive for the farms, correct?
I would argue, I think it depends. So, in some ways, piece rate's really attractive, right? Because you can sort of help people earn significantly more on that piece rate. However, I think that we've had sort of a generational shift in what skill sets we're seeing from pickers. And I say that not as a tree fruit grower, but as someone who talks to tree fruit growers on a pretty regular basis. And what they're seeing is that as as we have those generational changes where we're having younger pickers come in, that's a skill set that you haven't developed yet. It doesn't mean it can't be, but because of the regulations that we have in place, I suspect that we will see piece rate pay or bin rate pay die out over the next few years, simply because it just doesn't make sense.
What about the healthcare? Oh, I'm sorry. What about the bill that would be the tax break for farmers? How would that work?
So the farm tax break bill is a great one, I think. What it does is incentivize the ag community to adopt conservation practices. So you would get 25% back in a rebate effectively for things that help add to conservation plans. Whether that is maybe you're installing a center pivot to irrigate rather than using wheel lines or rill irrigation. Maybe you are enrolling in the EQIP program to do more water savings and conservation. And there is in the bill itself, there's a very specific number of things that qualify for that tax incentive. And it is things like it's investing in infrastructure and being enrolled in a conservation program on either a state or federal level. So what it really provides is growers the opportunity to say, it's worth it for me to be in a conservation frame of mind on a more formal level. So I would argue most farmers believe in conservation on some level. You have to maintain your farm. But what this does is formalize it in a way that says, I really believe in this and I want to do this, and I'm getting paid for it because I'm going to get some money back for the time and effort and money that I'm investing into conservation.
Quick questions for you from our audience. Glenn asks, how is their healthcare handled, H2A workers, while they're here, and who pays for it?
So healthcare is all on the shoulders of the employer. So whether they are going to a farm worker clinic, or if there's one available, or they're going to a clinic, something more formal in wherever you are, any medical bills, dental bills, those sorts of things are all handled and paid for by the employer.
And what about, there's a question from Dale, why would a laborer bust his hump to pick 8 bins in a day when he or she's going to get paid the same as the guy who picks 4 bins a day? Why bother?
Well, I think that's sort of the argument about piece rate. What is your incentive to pick more or less? And if your incentive is that you'll get paid more than, the guy next to you or the gal next to you, there is some, there's incentive to do more. However, because of everything else, it's not necessarily that farm workers are choosing not to do piece rate. It is that employers are effectively being compelled to change their pay practices to meet with the other payroll and accounting rules that have been set up for them.
Final question for you. There was a question about the bill number for the H2A rules that you were speaking about. I want to remind people, we'll give it to you here, but the things that we talk about, there's almost always the bill numbers and other things. If you don't get them here, or if you can't remember the number that's mentioned, you can always go to washingtonpolicy.org and you can see there what we're talking about and get that information that you're looking for. In fact, I put the little the link into that for this particular story. I've put it into the chat so you can grab it there if you need it. But go ahead, Pam.
I won't lie, I just did a really quick look because I'm juggling about 35 bills this session. So it's 5996 is the Senate bill number. There is, I believe, a companion bill in the House. But if you go to that first number, you'll get to it no matter what.
Final question for you, Pam. Where are you? What is the event that you're at, and why the cool background? And Todd Myers is waiting for us, but I did want to ask you that before I let you go.
So I am at the Washington, Oregon Potato Conference down in Kennewick. So I'm sitting under the bleachers in the Tri-City Americans hockey arena. And anybody who's not here is missing out. They're serving a fresh French fry bar for lunch today. And then tomorrow is baked potatoes. In fact, I know that your cohort, Donald, will be envious of my time here the next few days.
Well, so am I, because I'm smart enough to know Idaho has the reputation for potatoes, but Washington has the better potato country. And that is one great place to get some fries and a baked potato. You're not going to go wrong there. So good stuff. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pam. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Have a great day.
Thanks.